Welcome to the Investigation Game Podcast, brought to you by Workman Forensics.
Welcome to the Investigation Game Podcast. I'm Leah Wheatholter, CEO of Workman Forensics in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Joining me today is Trent Russell. Trent is the founder of Greenskies Analytics. Prior to Greenskies, Trent began his career in Ernst & Young's IT risk assurance practice, where he served multiple industries. He later joined the Financial Service Office at EY and facilitated the development of data analytics procedures before joining the University of Alabama System Office as the data lead for their Internal Audit department. At Greenskies, he develops data analysis and hands-free monitoring solutions for forward-thinking internal audit teams. Thank you for joining me today, Trent.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I've been a big fan of the show for a while now.
Well, thank you. So for this episode, I'd like to discuss where the world of automation and specifically like hands-free monitoring of data analysis and internal auditing coincide with the world of fraud investigations. That's a lot.
Yeah.
But just so our listeners know, you were a guest blogger on our blog last July explaining a simple method to detect fraud using ZScore. So thank you for sharing this, actually. Just personal note here, here at Workman, we have actually incorporated the tests from your article into our data sleuthing process. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Rachel was so excited. And we'll post that blog post in the show notes if anybody wants to look at that further. But before we get into the details of this topic, would you just tell us a little bit about how and why you created Greenskies Analytics?
Yeah, it really came out of a need so my background has always been audit, external audit, financial statement audit with a Big Four firm. I remember specifically we were doing this audit test, and it's a very common one in the IT audit world where you look at everyone that has been terminated for whatever reason. They are, they're fired or they're on leave or they've retired or whatever. And you want to make sure they don't have access to the system. So they don't have access to the GL or whatever other system that they would have access in. And so a way to do that, maybe an old school way to do that, if you would, is to get a list of all those terminated users and then follow it through the process through to see that the control is that management sends an email to HR and they also send an email to the security folks, and then security removes the access and HR does their thing so that they're not accidentally, still paying the person afterwards. And then you make sure that is kind of followed. And so what we were doing though or what someone showed me was, look, we can take this listing of users, terminated users. We can take this listing of users from the application, so everyone that's in the GL application, and we can run analytics against it to do a comparison. And if we see where somebody falls out, or we see where someone has access still, even though they're terminated, well, then that's the test basically. Like, you've tested every single person instead of, typically in audit, we take a sample. So if there's 100 people have been terminated, you would take a sample maybe of 10 or something to that effect. And so instead of doing that, we can test all 100, and we can do it in, 10 seconds, especially, year over year. We can do the same test every year in like 10 seconds because we've already written the script for it to automate it. And so that's kind of like what opened my eyes into analytics and how we can use it in audit. And so I got involved more with that. And then just from that, there's this need, there's a skills gap in the audit world relative to data analytics folks, because you kind of have to have the audit background and you have to also kind of have the analytics background. And there's just there's not a lot of people that kind of have that. So from that kind of birthed, if you would, Greenskies Analytics, where we help internal audit departments with their data analytics, advance them to the next level of the maturity model, or even just get them started with analytics. So
yeah, awesome. A couple of things you said in there that we've found true, or I found true in my own practice, is in using data in fraud investigations is similar to what you said, that we can look at everything,
right?
Not just a sample, and in the same amount of time, if not faster. Sometimes if it's something we can repeat over and over again, then there's nothing to reinvent. We just look at everything. I think, would you say that you run into this too, that once things are automated, the most challenging part is the data input, like getting the data into this automation?
Yeah, it can be for sure, because tables change, fields change, a new business unit is added, something that you can't account for happens with the business as it grows and as the technology changes, or they'll just say, hey, we're going to switch entire system, so this doesn't really work anymore, which takes a level of effort, but that's a lot of times it's low maintenance type things, and so that's part of it. It's like analytics and automation is the same as any other software. You get updates from Apple on your iPhone because they've made it better. They've had to tweak some things, and so that's basically a piece of it is maintaining it. So it can be difficult for sure initially to get it how you want it. They say, maybe anecdotally, I don't know if they've done any actual research around it, but I would say anecdotally also, about 80% of the time, data analytics is cleaning the data or doing data wrangling, however you want to say it, and getting it in a format to where you can actually use it.
Yeah, I would agree with that estimate. Not that I've studied it, but based on our cases and billing, yeah, I would say that's the majority of it as well. So something you also mentioned in talking about starting your practice is that finding people that have this internal audit, but also data analytics experience is not super common. And I'd say that's the same in my field too, even though I'm looking for it's like this investigator, maybe have some accounting, but also really I need someone who can understand how data works and to set up tests and procedures and the analytics, thinking about it from a data perspective, like how can this table join with this other table and do those comparisons in an efficient way. So what did you do in your career that kind of gave you this unique skill set?
Well, so I was in audit just because I think EY, so that was the firm I came from, Ernst & Young. And when I was looking for jobs, looking for internships, that kind of thing in college, they were the voted best company to start your career with. So I was like, why go anywhere else? So I've always been in audit, and I've always liked, I'll just say Excel, because of how much easier it can make your life. Not even just in the professional world, but I do stuff in my, not Excel, but in my, super fancy tool that have nothing to do with work. I'm from Alabama. I don't have a choice but to be a college football fan. I'm a huge Alabama football fan, Roll Tide. And so I'll look at stuff like, I remember doing this a couple of years ago. I wanted to know every high school athlete that has now been drafted in the NFL draft, college football player, who was the lowest rated prospect out of high school that got drafted the highest. And so this year, or 4 years ago, I guess, there was some guy who's a 2-star cornerback and he went to Iowa. Nobody really recruited him, and he was a top 5 draft pick. And so I just got curious what that was and started doing the analysis because I like doing the analysis. So I just kind of do it all the time. And what I tell people, and I think this is kind of answering your question, or maybe what you're getting to, is how you could get into it is, and I've started to say this recently, there almost has to be this dopamine drip in your brain when you're doing it that goes, this is cool. I like this. I'm having fun doing this. I'll know I'll be writing a script and being into it. My wife's like, Trent. I'm like, what? I'm into this thing right now. And so it takes I tell people, data literacy is kind of a hot topic in terms of having it across an entire organization. We want everybody to be data driven and using data analytics tools to some degree. And it's just it's not a realistic expectation. You have to enjoy doing it. It's not a skill that you can just push down on people to learn. It's far from just a tool that you have to learn. It's much more than that. So you kind of have to enjoy it. And if I could go on a little bit of a tangent here, if you don't mind, I can send you the link. And I was talking to someone recently about this within security, and I said, how do you get into cybersecurity? Where would you start? And they said, take the CompTIA Security Plus course. And if you like it, then great, go to the next step. If you don't like it, then don't get into security because you don't like it. It's not something you enjoy. And so there is another course, and it's $12 or something. But and like I said, I'll send you the link for anybody that's interested in getting analytics. But take this course, and if you like it, keep going down the path. And if you don't, then you don't like it, and there's nothing wrong with that either. That's the message I've been preaching for the past couple of weeks now. So I wanted to take advantage of the opportunity.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. One of the things that, and I think that goes with, I like that because I'm going to steal that because people do ask me, how do I get into this? And I mean, I am working. Well, yeah, I could totally tell people, well, you need to play my game. If you don't like playing my games, then you're probably not going to like it. But one of the things I do, that kind of career advice that I've been giving lately, is you need to start serving in that area. And it's really just to see, like, do you like what you would have to do? You know, the stories behind fraud investigations are cool, but the everyday is actually staring at Excel or staring at IDEA or entering lots of bank statements.
Because it is like that on the frauds, because I see fraud and I'm like, yeah, that's really cool. And I could see analytics being the same. You see the end result of it and what happened, and you go, oh, that's really cool. I want to do that. Then you get into the meat of it and it's like, wow, this is not, it's hard.
Yeah, it's really detailed. And especially like, I've been thinking about this week, actually, that in a fraud case, it's one thing to do like an audit that's based on tests and so forth and let people know what you found. But there's still kind of this area, like if you miss something, you said you might miss something, But in the area of fraud, and then especially if it's going to be expert witness, everything we do is scrutinized. In a case we're working right now, even our work papers are going to go to an agency. And so just that level of scrutiny. And so it may sound cool what we get to do right now, but like the level of responsibility and scrutiny, and that can become a lot for sure. So that's why people should play my game and go try this test that you're going to send us the link for if they like our conversation. So what is your favorite type of problem to solve for your clients?
The one they didn't know they had is probably my favorite. And it's because when you look at the data, you didn't even know they had the problem, and to be able to kind of show them, hey, did you know that that this is going on? Or did you know that there's only one person in your company that is buying from this one vendor, and that's something that is kind of a red flag that you should maybe go look at? I love doing that kind of stuff because then it also is a chance to educate them even further on analytics and how it can help, because there's so much you can do in analytics that, it's such a broad term that it can kind of be hard to understand how to use it. So I like being able to find the thing they didn't know they had. And I don't say that, I laugh because it almost sounded like I was stroking my ego to say that, well, you didn't even know you had that, and look what I found. But it is not necessarily for ego praising. It's just, something that I enjoy doing so that they, again, like, are educated and understand analytics more.
Well, and you're setting them up to win in the future. So if you found something they didn't know about, but now that they know about it, they can reduce their risk. So do you have an example?
We can use one with the ZScore would be good, since we've talked about it. Probably one of my favorite examples for a couple different reasons. One, it's just kind of easy to understand, I guess. And then, I don't know, I just think it's kind of an interesting use case. But there was this client, and we were looking at worked hours and overtime hours. And, I said to myself, like, we can apply ZScore here. We can look at, and so ZScore, real quick, it's all it is. You don't really have to know the statistics behind it to know how it works. But basically, it just picks out, and if you look at the link that Leah was talking about, you can, I think the workbook's in there, or I explain it in there further, but it basically just finds outliers in your data. So if everything is, averaging around a 5, and then there's something that's a 10, it'll spit that out. And so we were looking at overtime hours. And so what we did was we applied the Z-score to every job title in the company, and then looked to see where there are outliers in overtime that was being billed. And so what we found was there was we'll call them a janitor 2. So there's like a janitor 1, janitor 2, janitor supervisor, and there's like janitor 2, and there's like 12 of them at this company. And the average janitor 2 worked 42 hours a week. So they averaged 2 hours of overtime a week. And there was this one of those 10 that averaged 48 hours a week. And so we look at that and you're like, well, why would this one person be working so many more hours than anyone else? And so we got to ask that question. And it turns out it was more of a control issue than it was, like fraud or something to that effect, which is kind of, I know we're like, this is a fraud-based podcast, but I find that a lot of times that when we do analytics, I think people think analytics, especially maybe an internal audit, is about finding fraud. And of course we do, but it's also about finding business process issues where there's maybe inefficiencies or ineffectiveness. And so being able to look at the entire population and figure out where that is really like where a large benefit is. The other example that I'm thinking of, which is probably this might be my new favorite. I should have just spoken about this one. Okay. And I just don't want to go on this long rant about machine learning, but to summarize at a high level, machine learning, probably a topic you may or may not have heard of, but or your audience, I meant, but because I know we've talked about it, is just being able to make a prediction based on the historical data. So like a very high level way of thinking about it is because we do it all the time naturally in our brains. And so like if you're looking at a particular stock in the stock market and you see for the past 3 months that it's gone up over the past 3 months, well, then that's the historical data. So if you want to make a prediction, you could say, I would predict that next month it would continue to go up. Okay. And so and this is specific to fraud, it is said, and you're the fraud expert, so I'll let you tell me if I'm wrong here or not. This kind of secondhand information that when you find somebody that's committed fraud, and I'm talking corporate fraud here, even if they admit to the fraud and they say, yep, you caught me red-handed, and this is how much I stole. It is, they say, usually a third of whatever they actually took. So, hey, I stole $100,000. Well, it's probably closer to $300,000. They just don't keep good records of it. So even if they try to help you find the frauds that they committed, they might not be able to find them all. So we had that situation. And what we did is we had a list of all the transactions and we sat and said, look, we know this one's fraud. We know this one's fraud. We know this one's fraud. And she said, this one is, and this one and this one. And so in the file, we literally created a column that said fraud, yes or no. And everyone that we knew was fraud, we marked it as a yes. Everything that we knew wasn't, or that we thought wasn't, we marked it as a no. So fraud, yes, fraud, no. And then with machine learning, what you can do is run it through a crazy, sophisticated algorithm that there's no reason for anyone that's using it to understand how it all works, because you basically have to be a PhD or some multiple PhD probably, but to understand it. But you run it through the algorithm and you tell it what key fields to look at to determine if one that is not fraud or that you don't know is fraud, if it actually is fraud based on the characteristics of the ones that are fraud. So the algorithm will say, hey, look, all these 15 are fraud. And we found that all these that are fraud have these characteristics in common. So we're going to take those characteristics and apply them to all the ones we don't know are fraud. And we'll even tell you with a certain degree of confidence, out of 100, score out of 100, if we think it's fraud or not. And so we did that. And the end result, there was one that it said like, hey, we think this one is, we have a 75% confidence that this one that we don't know if it's fraud or not is fraud. Let's go look at it, instead of looking at every single one of those transactions. I didn't know it at the time, but I sent it to the client and they emailed me back and said, hey, funnily enough, we were talking to the investigator yesterday, and that was one that they had been looking into without you, obviously telling us, as being fraud. So, they're like, congratulations, the thing, worked. The other side of that is there's going to be false positives. So not all, and that's part of machine learning. It's not going to give you the answer with 100% confidence every time.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we're going to take just a second to jump over to an ad and we'll be right back.
At Workman Forensics, we're your modern-day Sherlock Holmes. The team at Workman Forensics follows patterns to find money through forensic accounting and fraud investigation services. Using our data sleuth process, we build client cases telling the story of what actually happened. This process serves clients in the best way, whether they are going through a divorce, a partnership dispute, an estate and trust dispute, or a fraud investigation. So what is data sleuthing? Well, after serving clients in this best way for 10 years, we are proud of our technological improvements, making our investigations work similar to that of a manufacturing process. By following a consistent investigative and internal process, our team addresses client concerns in a timely, responsive, and thorough manner. But don't worry, clients don't go through this process alone. We believe communication is vital to the success of an engagement, so each client is guided by a highly trained and specialized expert forensic accountant along the way. And because we think data sleuthing is the best way to investigate financial disputes, we work to train other professionals as well through our investigation games, guided interactive workshops, and our Be a Data Sleuth seminars. To learn more about any of these services or trainings, visit our website, workmanforensics.com. In fact, our website is full of resources for anyone looking to learn more about forensic accounting, fraud investigation, or our data sleuth process. This includes blog posts, free Excel downloads, more podcast episodes, and links to our YouTube channel. So if you're looking to get into the investigation industry, or if you've been an investigator for years, we know you'll find something helpful in our free resources. So visit our website, workmanforensics.com.
Welcome back to my interview with Trent Russell. So Trent, I want to circle back to when you were talking about as part of, using analytics, that it's not necessarily just about detecting fraud, but also just maybe areas where things could be improved, or maybe even human error. I'm guessing some of this is. So how do you start your engagements where you can start thinking in that way, or what do you recommend? So sometimes whenever I talk to internal auditors, they're really excited about finding fraud. My concern as a fraud investigator is, but how do you know that that's fraud? And instead, looking at it from anomalies and then looking at intent, how do you distinguish between this is a human error and this is fraud? I know how I do it, but I'm just kind of curious, especially when, you're talking about machine learning and how you can get these results, but then you also could have false positives. So kind of what's your process in working through that to see, is this human error? Is this fraud?
Yeah. And so I'm not an investigator. I'm more analytics. And so my process is pass it on to the investigator,
Nice.
pass it on to the expert. But the analytics process in general that I can speak to, I'll tell people, I think most people understand accounts payable. So let's say we're looking at accounts payable. Just go ahead and get what I've been calling desktop data. Just give me anything that you have on your desktop. We're talking to the person over AP. They're going to have, vendor name, amount, that kind of, invoice date, that kind of stuff. We don't need to make this complicated and saying I need all these 15 fields for this timeline and all that. Just give me something that you have so I can look at something. And then just taking that and doing some high level, what I call pivot table type work. Just look at the top 10 spenders, look at the bottom 10 spenders, look at maybe the ZScore and look at outliers and things like that. And so when you go back to them, you can say, look, we found XYZ. This seems like we can call it an anomaly. Or unusual. Can you, help me understand that? And a lot of times they'll say, we didn't even know that was going on, kind of harking back to what I mentioned earlier. Or say, yeah, I didn't know that was going on. And that does a couple things, especially from the audit world and maybe even in the business process improvement world or the fraud world, investigation world. They kind of look at that, and we're talking relationships, and they look at that and go, most people, the majority are not doing that. And so when you bring them something like that, they go, okay, this isn't just internal audit, the cops who are coming to beat us up because our account's off by a penny and write up a report on it and send it out to everybody. They are actually helping. And not only that, there is a sense of they care about my job, they care about my department, they care about the functions that our department plays in the overall success of the company. So that's really where I just start. It's rarely anything, super complicated. And then from there, they start to ask more questions. We dig in deeper and things like that. But, that's the other message I've been, preaching recently is just get something and look at it. We can all filter in Excel. And if not, it takes, 3 minutes to Google how to do that. We can all filter and look at the top things, the bottom things, throw it in pivot table, that kind of stuff. So that's kind of my approach. And then we take a deeper dive, after that.
Yeah, I completely agree. Because analytics to me in my world is we found some things that look unusual, but we need more context. So, yeah, absolutely. And whether that's letting the client, in your case, having the client weigh in maybe, or talking to the subject themselves, like you were talking about. Anyway, I love the machine learning. As you're explaining the machine learning, I'm thinking, how could we work that into ours? So I do have a question on machine learning. So in the example you provided, somebody was talking to the subject, right? Is that okay? So then this person was advising, this is fraud, this is not, this is fraud, this is not. So do you need that type of input in order to use the machine learning aspect of this?
Yeah, for predictive, you have to have like the test data. So you have to have the data that says this is what it is. You have to label it. So you have to be able to say, because you have to be able to use the historical data to predict what's going on. And so if you don't have it labeled as yes or no, then you're not going to be able to do that. There's other techniques like clustering that will kind of do that for you to a degree. So it's kind of, we don't know what question we're asking of the data. We're just going to throw it into this clustering thing, and it'll cluster the data together so you can see if there's anomalies that way. So that's an approach if you don't have a question that that you're asking, or you don't know what to ask of the data.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah, I would say most of the time we try to convince employers not to fire their employees before we have a second to at least look at a sample.
Oh yeah.
But usually they're too mad and they've already fired the person.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to think of how I could work that in. So in the engagements that you work, who are your target clients? No names or anything. Just what are the best clients for you at Greenskies Analytics?
Yeah. So it's anybody that's in internal audit that really is, I would say, forward thinking. And by that, I mean, they want to use technology. They're not in audit, a lot of times we say check the box auditors, they just kind of come in and do you have this in place? Yes or no? Okay, that's great and wonderful. Next engagement. So really it's the forward thinking ones are the ones that I would say partner with the best, because they want to make their department better. They want to help the company. And so really outside of, most financial services places, large banks have a lot of analytics people or a dedicated analytics person. But really, I'm still, I'm talking to audit groups all the time, and there's still not a lot of dedicated people. So effectively, if there's an internal audit department, those are the people that I work with.
Okay, great. You also host a podcast, the Audit Podcast. Tell us more about the purpose behind it and the types of guests and information that you provide.
Yeah, so it is very aptly named the Audit Podcast. It is for internal auditors. I think we even at some point we say something to the effect of it's for internal auditors, compliance, and risk management people. You're cool too, or something like that. And I guess I need to include fraud folks also, because we talk a little. Yeah, we talk a little fraud. We'll have to have you on there for sure, but it's one of the more popular episodes probably. So yeah, I guess we need to get some more fraud folks on there because it is very interesting. But
I know lots of those.
Yeah. So, and so we've actually had one of your previous guests, Jamie Shine. She was on the show talking internal audit. It's mostly internal auditors or people that, consultants, speakers that kind of, I would say, outside looking in on internal audit to get their perspective. And also so hot topics in audit right now are security, or security is a hot topic in audit. So we've had a couple of CISOs and security folks, and we have more planned for the year to talk about that risk because it's everywhere. That's like all, that we're hearing. So it's really, it's about how to be a better auditor. And the thing that I think I'm most proud of, and it took me a while to realize that I needed to do this more often, is I would have somebody that would come on and, theoretically say, well, we should be doing this, and audit should be doing this, and we're not doing enough of this. And I'd say, that's great. I totally agree. How do we do that?
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh, well, I hadn't thought about that, or they'll, they'll say, this is what you need to do. But I've really worked hard to make sure and let the guests know, okay, go into your theory. I don't care. It's your show is what I tell them. I'm just the host. It's your show. Say whatever you want to, but I'm going to ask you how to do that. So if you're not prepared to answer the how question, then you probably shouldn't bring it up.
Yeah, that's good. I felt the same frustration in my career with, there would be great fraud investigative training, and it's like, oh man, this is awesome. And then I go back to my desk to try to apply it to a case, and I'm like, crap, how do I connect these things? How do I take what they were saying and use that in an Excel spreadsheet or when I'm looking at bank statements or whatever? So that's awesome. Totally, definitely needed in lots of fields, but especially audit. and fraud investigation. So
yeah, and even in analytics. So I speak at IA chapters and ISACA chapters and other audit groups, and usually the title of the presentation is like how to actually use analytics in audit, or a how-to on audit analytics. Like, it's how to actually do it. It's not, because we have to attend trainings to get our continuing education credits. And so I'll, usually opt for maybe the analytics or something a little more technical. And it's just like, even then it's like, well, that is cool, but how do you do that? And so that's something that I've, I guess has just always kind of bugged me. So that's one of the missions that I'm on, is how to actually, be a better auditor and have a better department, along with being a more effective leader within that group also.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Trent, thank you so much for taking time to talk with me today and provide valuable information to our listeners. So if any of our listeners would like to connect with you or learn more about your podcast or services, what's the best way to do so?
Yeah. So the podcast, again, it's called the Audit Podcast. If you want to, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm on there about as much as I am in my email. But if you want to email me, it's Trent.Russell with 2 S's and 2 L's at gskanalytics.com. I think that's probably the best route. There's a link I talk about, and sorry if I know we're trying to close this out, but I talk about using technology, not necessarily in the ways of like analytics, and it doesn't have to be about like AI and all this crazy stuff all the time. We need to use technology to make things easier, even in terms of, and something I appreciated with your show that you do this with your guests, is on my website, there's a link at the top right that says, let's talk. If you click that link, it'll show you my calendar and you can pick a time. On average, it takes 6 emails to schedule a meeting, which is kind of ridiculous. So that's what I'm talking about. Like, we can even just use technology to do something to be more effective, or rather be more efficient in something as simple as setting a meeting. So you can go there, you can see my calendar and book time and save yourself the trouble of all the back and forth in an email.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, aren't those like the best things that were created, those meeting
links? They really
links?
are. Yeah.
Oh, so nice. Thank you, whoever started doing that.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we'll make sure to link to these things in the show notes. And thank you again.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was great.